Okay, welcome to part two. Okay, when we left, we were talking about our role in cybersecurity from an enterprise perspective, and we were specifically drilling into this thing we call risk. So when we think about risk, I tell you guys, everything we do in life is risk. Everything, risk. So if it is, then let's get a risk definition. And this is a very important definition. Why? Because everything else that we will deal with is going to deal with some aspect of what I call the risk definition. Risk, the likelihood of a threat agent taking advantage of a vulnerability and the corresponding business impact. Let me read that again, very important. Risk is the likelihood of a threat agent taking advantage of a vulnerability and the corresponding business impact. So what does risk do? Risk ties together four very key components: vulnerability, threats, likelihood of exploitation, and the impact it's going to have on your business. So what does that mean? Okay, let's think about this for a second. I live in Dallas, Texas area. Here in Dallas, we own a couple vehicles. And if you think about owning vehicles, there's a lot of vulnerabilities associated with owning any type of vehicle, right? You've got hail damage, you've got the likelihood, you have theft, whatever, limbs falling out of trees. Okay, just because something is a vulnerability, I don't panic because it's a vulnerability, because I have to look at these other components of risk, such as, is there a threat that would try to exploit that vulnerability? I may have a vulnerability of, all vehicles, they're vulnerable to rusting, because they're metal, most of, all the parts. However, since I live, a pretty good ways away from the ocean and salt water, the threat really isn't there for rust. However, living in Texas, hail damage. If my vehicle is parked outside, it is very vulnerable to hail damage, and that is a threat. That is a very prevalent threat in Dallas, Texas. Now we have to look at what is the likelihood of it. Even though that may have a vulnerability, even though there may be a threat, what is the likelihood of that threat exploiting that vulnerability? That is really risk, and this is what we do in security, not just cyber, but really all security is based around this model. Understanding what vulnerabilities, my weaknesses, my vulnerabilities, knowing what threats do I have in the environment, so that's what we call a threat agent, and what is the likelihood of that threat being exploited, or that vulnerability being exploited by the threat. Risk. So what can you do with risk? There are some risk strategies. When we talk about risk strategies and how we mitigate, risk mitigation strategy. Well, first we can avoid risk. How can I avoid risk? Well, in this example, if I just sold all of my cars, well, guess what? I've just avoided the risk of having a car damaged with hail damage. Not very practical, because that really hampers how I get to work every day. But that's how I can avoid it. I can transfer it, which I have done. How do you transfer risk? You buy insurance. So I've transferred my risk to Geico or to State Farm or whoever the insurance company is. Acceptance. Big part of that I do as well. Meaning that the threats are there, the vulnerabilities are there, but when you kind of do a cost analysis, you go, well, you know what? I'm not going to spend this much, so I'm just going to take my chances and just try to ride it out. I'm just going to accept the risk. And we can also try to mitigate. And really, now this is where what we do in the world of cyber comes in, is risk mitigation. Now, these are actions that we take to try to protect against risk or threats and attacks. That is really what we work a lot at. These are business owner decisions, but we provide the inputs to an organization to show and help mitigate risk, how to bring that risk level down. Now, the way we do this is through different types of frameworks, okay, risk management frameworks. So when we think about frameworks, what is a framework? Like I said, it's just a guide. It's a template that we use to develop our security processes, our security procedures, to identify roles and responsibilities. Multiple types of frameworks out there. You got the ISO series of frameworks, 27001, 27005, COBIT, I'm sorry, I always pronounce that wrong, but COBIT, version V5, you got RIMS, maturity models. There's a lot. But for the purpose of this class, we are really going to focus more so here on the risk management framework for federal information system, RMF, that's what we call that, the risk management framework. Because, and here's why, because if you kind of understand one framework, you're going to see that they all follow a similar path. They all are structured similar. They all use the same types of controls or families of controls to try to help mitigate this thing we call risk, okay? So when we think about RMF, Risk Management Framework, as a framework that we're using as a representative framework just for the purpose of explaining frameworks. This is for federal systems, okay? This the risk management framework. It was born out of FISMA, Federal Information System Modernization Act, and this is what really started moving us forward in having better, more well-defined processes of managing risk at the federal government level. Now, this is also starting to stream down not only to the federal government, but also to state, local governments, as well as industry. Industry like myself, where I work, that we support the federal government, the Department of Defense, then we align ourselves also with this risk management framework. Okay, this risk management framework is built on 6 steps, a 6-step process. It's where you do categorization. But basically in this categorization is where we categorize information systems based on information types. Again, talking about the information. What type of information are you processing? It really comes down to, where the golden eggs are. What is the critically protected information in your organization? That's how you categorize it. And now that you can categorize it, it makes it easier now to start saying, well, these are the types of controls I need to put in place to protect this information. No different than we do in our own home every day. We actually, we use this risk management framework in our day-to-day lives every day. So, and I'll tell you why, kind of once I go through these. Then we select the controls that we need to protect the information based on how we prioritized or categorized it. Then once we select the controls, then we're going to have to implement those controls. And now that we've implemented them, we need a process to assess the controls to be sure they work, and then we can actually start using that system or have it authorized, to use or to operate. And now after that, we want to go into a continuous monitoring phase to be sure that these controls we selected are still working. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example in your own home. If you're a homeowner, you ever bought a home, or even if you've rent and you got a new home, what is one of the first things you do when you buy a new house, right? You change the locks, okay? You change the locks. So you look around your house and you say, okay, I've got locks on my doors. I want to protect my home. I've got locks on the windows, and I need to have some type of security system. Well, you've just categorized your home, the security posture of your home. You've done that categorization. Okay, so, and now when you look at this, you go, okay, what's the most important? Well, let's see. My door locks. I want to get those first. Okay, then we're going to put locks on the windows, and I want to get this uber really expensive system to detect intrusions. So I don't have the money, so we're probably going to do that later. So that's how I've categorized my home as far as securing the entry points. So now I need to select the controls to put in place. Pretty simple. Let's say I'm going to get a new door lock as well as deadbolt for the door. I'm going to put those little rods in the windows. So I'm selecting the controls, and I want to get, like I say, a really good ring system or to put up in my house to do the detection. All right, so now that I've selected them, now let's implement. So what I'm going to do to implement, well, I'm going to get in the car, go down to Home Depot or Lowe's, and I'm going to buy my locks. I'm going to buy everything that I need to shim my windows, and I'm going to pick up my ring system. So let's talk about the door locks, implement. So what do? Yeah, you get your screwdriver, you replace the locks and everything. Now, you got your locks replaced. Anybody who's ever replaced locks on a door, what is the first thing you do after you finish putting locks on there? Think about it. What do? You grab that handle, you lock it, and then you shake it about 5 times, just to be sure. Then you pull the door. Guess what you've just done? You have just assessed those controls. You've assessed that lock to be sure that one, that the deadbolt, that the throw, went in and protected the door. So you have just assessed. You categorized it. You went out and selected the controls you needed. You want to put new locks. You went to Home Depot, bought the locks, put them on. You implemented, and then you did the shake test. You have the obligatory 5 times. Pull the door, twist the handle. You assessed. Now you say, you know what? We're good. I've implemented our controls, and now I feel comfortable at night going to bed, sleeping, because I've implemented and assessed the controls. So you've authorized. Now you said, okay, now it's good to use. So now you have an authorization to operate. But that's not all. Really, step 6 is probably the most important, right? It's continuous monitoring. Continuous monitoring. So what do we do every night before we go to bed, right? Every night we got this, most of us, we have this little routine that you walk around, check the doors to be sure they're all locked. Okay, because your significant others, you're going to get yelled at. Did you check the door locks, honey? Yeah, I thought you checked them. Now you got to get out of bed, put your shorts on, walk back up there and check the locks. But that's your continuous monitoring. Continuous monitoring. Because you want to ensure that the controls you selected, implemented, and assessed are working continuously. So really, that's what risk management is all about. That is what this circle, when you think about RMF, the risk management framework, that is what it's doing. And like I say, we do this in everyday life. So it's nothing really cosmic about that. But now we just apply this same rudimentary set of skill sets, 6 steps, to our information systems. So let's talk about controls and countermeasures, okay? So when we think about controls, let's say, so we have a system. Let's say, here's a information system, it's a computer system, and on that system, there is critical information. And, when we think about this critical information, there's a lot of vulnerabilities, like we talked about earlier, right? You got vulnerabilities to the network, you've got vulnerabilities, your network could go down, your system could go down. You got physical and environmental. Yeah, you could have a hailstorm, you could have tornado, whatever it may be. And you have, insider threat, you have intentional insider threats, you have unintentional insider threats, like family members who don't use good cyber hygiene may leave things open where your critical information is accessible. So there's multiple vulnerabilities. And then over here, there are the threats. This is kind of what we talked about before, right? You got external threats. Somebody trying to, like I say, hurricanes and things like that. You've got vandals, people trying to break into your house. These untrained users. So that you see, even though I got vulnerabilities, I have threats. And these threats are always trying to take advantage or exploit these vulnerabilities. That's why I put controls in place. Now, these security controls, they could be many things. One, I could replace or upgrade my router to a more secure router, better technology. For physical damage, I can put keyboard covers and things like that over my keyboard so my kids don't spill drinks in them. I can put antivirus software. So these are the controls that I am putting in, or the countermeasures that I am putting in place to try to reduce the likelihood that these threats are going to take advantage and exploit these vulnerabilities and then get to my critical information. Well, in most cases, it's never 100%, meaning that you're going to always have what we call residual risk. This is after I've applied all my controls, right? I've done all these things. Then there's what level of risk, is still out there. That's what we call residual risk. So what do you do with this residual risk? You can do 1 or 2 things pretty much. First, like most of us, you can just accept it, meaning that I'm just going to accept that level of risk. Just like on my door, I got locks, I got on my doors and windows. But is that really going to stop somebody from breaking into my house? No, of course not. So I'm just going to accept that level of risk. Second thing I can do is I can do a cost-benefit analysis to mitigate that. And here's why that word is important, cost-benefit analysis, meaning that I don't want to spend more money to mitigate a risk than the information or the asset that I am protecting is worth. I don't want to spend $100 to protect a $50 asset. So that's why it's very important. I mean, really, if I wanted to really protect my home, yeah, I could have just built my house underground, built it in a wall. I could have metal plates welded over all my windows, metal shutters, metal doors. Is it really worth the cost? Is it really worth the cost when I think about the threats, the vulnerabilities, and the likelihoods? Probably not. So that's why most of the time we end up accepting that risk. But that is what a security control is. A control is something that I put in place that will try to mitigate the likelihood of a threat agent exploiting a vulnerability. So let's talk about controls a little bit more when we talk about security controls. We can categorize security controls in multiple ways. Like I said, I'm just using these three. Actually, there's multiple categories of controls. But I'm just for instruction's sake, we're going to just talk about this in using these three types of categories: preventative controls, detective controls, corrective controls. Preventative control, like I said, that's something that tries to prevent a threat from exploiting a vulnerability. A door lock, it keeps you from coming in. A detective control, that would be my security alarm system. It's not going to stop anybody from coming in, but it's just going to detect that, hey, yeah, there's some activity out there. A corrective control, what that does is try to mitigate the consequence of a threat. Corrective control could be additional training, for instance, and many times it could be what we call an administrative control. That we see that your kids, okay, they're not doing locking the screen when they walk away and they got their friends over. So you got to kind of train, hey guys, so when you're on the computer, I don't want you to leave the computer unlocked if you're not in the room. Okay. Corrective control to mitigate some type of consequence of a threat. Now we can also take this and we can kind of build the metrics out of this, right? So we can take each category and have different types of controls. So within these categories, you can have technical controls, technical or logical controls. These are things like when we talk technical, these are network or information system centric controls, firewalls, biometrics, like I say, your different types of authenticators, authentication devices. Physical controls, like I say, locks, monitoring systems, your environmental controls, things like that. Those are things that will physically stop you from going in. Security guards. Administrative controls, these are your policies, procedures, personnel screening, training. All of these things are what we call administrative. Technical, so we can have, preventative, corrective, detective categories, and within those categories, we can have technical, physical, or administrative controls. So when we bring all of those together, like I say, we can build like a little matrix out of these. So for instance, if we look at motion sensor. A motion sensor would be what? It's a physical detective control. A firewall, okay? That is a preventive technical control. Security guards. Now this is a tricky one because why? Because many times you can have controls that could fit in multiple categories. See, a security guard could be a physical corrective control, but it could also be a physical preventative control. If you think about it, if you have a security guard posted out, but actually that's what you want it to be, is a preventative control. See a security guard? Let me just keep driving right on by. So that is how we can start looking at controls, from a matrix environment. And why is that important? Well, and this may be a little bit hard to see, I hope not. Because when we look at any of these frameworks that we talk about, whether it's ISO 27001, 27003, whatever it may be, COBIT, as well as risk management frameworks. And these are, they all follow a similar look feel. They have control families, groupings of controls, how we've bundled controls together. For instance, we have a control family called access control that controls, and within this, there are multiple controls. Like if it's from a risk management framework perspective, a NIST 853, there's about 900 controls here that you can tailor in and out, but we won't get into that. But you have it, awareness and training controls. So you see just a list of controls. But what this helps us start understanding is, are they administrative, detective, are they preventative, what type of control? Because now this helps me to know how to assess these controls. Once I implement them, now I can start to know better how to assess those controls because I know what type of control and the relationships of those controls. So when we think about risk, that is one of the things we always want to be aware of, is understanding the risk, the controls, and the countermeasures that we put in place. You remember that risk formula, right? The risk definition, the likelihood of a threat agent exploiting a vulnerability and the corresponding business impact. Very important when we talk about business impact, because again, I don't want to pay more for security than the asset that I am securing. So that's why that's important. Okay, in part 3, we're going to pick it right back up and just kind of go a little bit deeper in some of these areas with respect to more so the how of cybersecurity. Not too deep though. All right, be right back in part 3.